Brian Hall back here at Orlando Code Camp 2013, and I'm here with Jesse Liberty, and Jesse has given us 2 sessions today, a crash course on Windows 8 Part 1 and Part 2. So, Jesse, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, what was your crash course about, I guess, in general?
Well, Part 1 is about design guidelines, introduction to Windows 8, why would you code for Windows 8, and then how do you get started, how do you put the program together, how do you think about the code, what are the differences in programming for Windows 8 versus XAML coding for WPF or for Silverlight, something like that. So it's a basic grounding in Windows 8 programming.
Right. And then Part 2?
Part 2 is a pretty big jump forward. It's an intermediate course in Windows 8 programming and tackles more of the actual API and what it takes to build a solid Windows 8 program, how you manage views, how you manage the split view, and how you manage zoom, semantic zoom, and let's see, what else do we cover? When time allows, we talk about files and some of the more advanced topics that a Windows 8 programmer is going to run into.
Right. And as far as Windows 8 programming is concerned, what is what are the biggest stumbling blocks to new developers as they come over here from say,
Well, fair enough. I think that a lot depends on what they're coming from.
Right.
If they're coming from Silverlight or WPF, then they already have a lot of the XAML,
right.
and they probably have a lot of the C#. What they're going to be dealing with is the API, and really what amounts to a different API to the operating system. And so they're going to be looking at how do I make this happen in these namespaces, and how do I put together the program, and how do I interact with some of the new features of Windows 8 and so on.
Okay.
I think that Silverlight programmers and WPF programmers certainly have a head start. Windows Phone programmers an even bigger head start because they understand the application lifecycle,
right,
pretty well. It's very, very similar with Windows 8.
Yeah, and the application lifecycle, we're talking in this term like about tombstoning, or when something happens, they lock the screen.
Well, everything from starting up the application, the way you launch an application in Windows 8 may be somewhat different from Windows 7, because not only might the user launch it from a tile, which is starting the application very much like you would in Windows 7, but it can also be launched through contracts, such as a search contract, and can be launched in a number of different ways. And then when you bring up another application, your first application is suspended, and then the application can be resumed. However, a suspended application can also be terminated if the operating system needs that memory, and you need to be able to look and say, how was I started, and what was my state before I was started, and what should I restore? Do I need to do any work or not?
And in like the suspended state, just like a lot of development I do is on the web for now, so I haven't gotten into the to the client side as much on the Windows 8 side. Mm-hmm. But when you say it'll be suspended and then or resumed or terminated, could, for example, you take the suspension, store that into a local storage, the state of the app at that point in time, and whether or not it gets terminated or resumed, you could still bring it.
Well, when an application is suspended, you have 5 seconds to take any state and store that away. Presumably, if you're storing lots of data, you're storing it as the app is running. But as you get that suspension event, you have 5 seconds to store away state. If you're then restored, you don't have to do anything because the application was in memory and it just comes back.
Right.
If you were terminated for whatever reason and now you're restarted and your logic says, well, I want to return the user to where he was, then you would use that saved state to do so.
Right. And like you just spoke to that actually a little bit, was as your app's running, you're saving state anyway.
Yes.
So you shouldn't be required to do everything in that 5 seconds.
No, you shouldn't be required to, and in fact, it's not enough time to do everything if you're storing a great deal of data. It's really, that 5 seconds is really meant for saving application state so that you can give the user the illusion that that application, although suspended, was actually running in the background. And a suspended application does not use any resources other than memory. It is occupying some memory, but it's not using any CPU, it's not affecting the battery, it is really fully a suspended application,
Yeah.
unless you're running a background process.
Right. And in that case, if you are running a background process, you're in suspension, but you're still running a background?
Well, there are a couple of situations you might want to do that. For example, if you have an audio application that plays music, you might want it to continue playing even though another application has been opened. Or you might have notifications that are coming out periodically to keep your live tile going. So there are ways to have an application that's been suspended and yet is still having some impact on the computer.
Okay. Now, in terms of the XAML stack, I keep hearing this. You know, you basically, if you know Silverlight or WPF or the Windows Phone XAML stacks, it's a very easy transition coming over to Windows 8.
I think that's right in terms of understanding layout and the XAML and understanding how you divide up your application and where the logic goes. I wouldn't say it's a very easy transition. There's a lot to know about Windows 8 itself, but certainly you're miles ahead of somebody who's going to try to pick up both the layout and the language in addition to the API.
Right.
So yes, I think there's a very natural progression from Silverlight or WPF to Windows Phone to Windows 8.
Right. Absolutely.
I think that's a comfortable transition for a lot of developers.
Is the nature of building a tablet type application, a WinRT type application, what are some of the, you mentioned the snap view, for example. Are these things easily done within the context of some of the app frameworks that they have?
Right, fair question. First of all, it's really important to distinguish between the two types of applications you might be building. One is a Windows 8 desktop application, and that is very much just like a Windows 7 desktop application. Anything that ran on Windows 7 will run on Windows 8 desktop, only faster.
Right.
And there's no difference in how you build that. You probably build that in WPF. The other is what are called Windows Store applications, and they are a whole new beast.
Right.
And there is a great deal of support in the frameworks for what is necessary to build a good Windows 8 store application. And then there's also some programming constructs, but there's a lot of guidance and samples on how to do that. I think where people are looking for help is, okay, I have a grid view and now the user's put me into Snap View, and what do I do now? How do I make that respond appropriately? Or I want to work with the sensors, or I want to work with different aspects of the tablet that haven't been prevalent in Windows 8 in previous programming for Windows, that in a Windows Store application are really important. Also, there are guidelines on what it takes to be a good Windows Store application, and meeting those guidelines and making sure your application has the look and feel of a Windows 8 application.
Absolutely. So what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, I just completed a course for Pluralsight on Windows 8 applications,
All right.
which is called Windows 8 from Start to Store, and I'm starting a second course for them. That is my weekends and night job. My day job is working for Telerik as an evangelist, and that gives me the opportunity to talk at conferences and to continue writing and to do my blogging and talking with developers. So it's a nice mix.
Yeah. And continuing your podcasting?
Continuing my podcasting, thank you. Yet another podcast, which has been a great deal of fun. And we do a lot on Windows 8, but also branch out to a lot of other technical topics as well.
Absolutely. No, it's a great podcast. Personally, I love it. So
thank you.
So Telerik, what are some of the things you're doing for Telerik in Windows 8?
Well, I've been focusing. Was originally hired as a XAML evangelist, which meant working on WPF and Silverlight and Windows Phone and Windows 8.
Right.
I would say these days my focus is really WPF and Windows 8, and that has helped me a lot in terms of narrowing that focus and deepening my experience and to whatever extent I have expertise in those fields, and really understanding what it is that Telerik has to offer. The other piece, I think, is that as Telerik moves towards pointing folks towards our DevCraft, which is our integrated collection, we've been spending a lot of time on, well, how do these different tools work and play well together? So, for example, Phil, one of the other evangelists, Phil DePixie, just did a talk on how you can use Just Code with programming for Windows 8 in WinJS. And those are the kinds of things that we're really looking at, is how do these different pieces fit together.
Wow, Just Code for WinJS.
Yes, indeed.
It's a needed product for.
It is, and it's very exciting how much you can do with. I'm using Just Code more and more in my own Win8 XAML programming, and the ability to have code expansion and the kind of coverage that it brings is always very exciting.
Yeah, no, definitely. That tool set is definitely a valuable asset to the developers out there. So, well, Jesse, thank you very much for coming out, especially coming down from. Where are you hailing from now?
From the Boston area.
From the Boston area, and flying down just for Orlando Code Camp is definitely a great treat to have you here.
You're very kind.
Speaking here and interviewing, so we definitely appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Definitely.